The masking capability in Adobe Lightroom is truly phenomenal. In fact, it's the most powerful tool you've got in your entire editing workflow. I'm going to talk you through how to make the most of all of the different masking features, along with a few hints and tips to really make the most of it and take your editing to the next level. Welcome back to the channel and thanks for joining. In today's video, I'm going to take a number of my images and talk you through all of the capability that Adobe Lightroom provides when it comes to masking. I'll talk you through each of the masks that's available to you and show you how best to get everything that you can from each of those masking options. I'll also show you how to really optimize by combining the masking capability that's there. There'll be a few tips and tricks along the way, but mainly it'll be about the methodology to apply. If you've got any questions, of course, just drop me a note in the comment section below and I'll answer them there. And if anybody else has got any hints or tips that I don't cover, that would be super useful as well. Before we start, just want to talk about raw images. Now, many of you will know and will have heard or read or seen on other YouTube channels the importance of shooting and, more importantly, editing in RAW. Now, I understand the desire to capture an image that's immediately visible, immediately viewable, immediately uploadable to Instagram and the like, and even to print. And the advantage of JPEG is clear in that regard. There's no editing process to be done. But the RAW file captures every piece of data that hits the sensor. So if you are intending to edit your images, I would urge you to shoot in RAW. Editing in RAW gives you maximum access to the entire dynamic range, maximum flexibility when it comes to color. Ultimately, it gives you the best chance possible to edit the image so that it conveys the mood you're trying to convey, tells the story you're trying to tell. It's the best way to get the most impactful image. Anyway, let's get started in Adobe Lightroom. Here we are in the Develop module of Lightroom. This image of a white-throated swallow we're going to use to illustrate some of the most commonly used masks. You can see that I've made some base edits on this image and we're going to dive straight into the masks. You can see it's this circle with the dotted line. Click on there and you're given a variety of options. And for this image, we're going to look at the linear gradient, the radial gradient, the brush selection, and also the object selection. So let's look at the object selection first. Pretty straightforward. Click on there and then utilizing your cursor, which is turned into a brush if you like, you can change the size using your open and close square brackets. You literally left mouse key and select the object that you want to edit. And you don't have to be terribly careful with this. And you'll find in general that the selection will be pretty accurate. And there you have it. So once you've got that selection, you can then adjust the exposure or any of the other tools that you wish to select from the editing panel. And in this case, just for the demonstration purposes, we'll just darken that off a little bit. Excellent. We're going to add another mask. And what I'd like to do is bring attention more to the swallow. And I'd like to make the top of the image and the bottom of the image slightly darker so that the lighter part of the image is in the center, which naturally will draw the eye to the bird. So to do that, I'm going to use a linear gradient. Select that and you can drag from the top as far down the image as you like. If you want to hold your Shift key, then that will keep it 100% parallel. And from there, we can adjust the exposure, bring the whites down a little, and just bring the blacks down a touch. But I want to do that from the bottom as well. So I could select another linear gradient and do the same thing from the bottom, or I can add to this mask. So I'm going to add to this mask, and I'm going to add another linear gradient. And then when I select from the bottom and drag upwards, holding the Shift key, you can see it's applied exactly the same edits to that second linear gradient. If I click on the eye here, I can turn off that one linear gradient, turn it back on, turn off the first linear gradient, or I can test the entire mask. Now, once I've got that entire mask, I can, if I want to, adjust the extent to which that's applied. So if I think I've slightly overdone the exposure there, I can reduce the impact of that mask, or I can magnify it. In this case, we'll leave it where it is, and that's the linear gradient mask. The next mask we want to look at is the radial gradient. And the radial gradient is a circle. And you can make the circle any size that you want and any shape, and you can rotate the gradient. And in this case, what I want to do is emphasize the light coming from the right-hand side. So I'm going to move that gradient all the way to the right-hand side, and I'm going to increase the feather. You'll see as I increase the feather, that inner circle gets smaller. And what that's illustrating, the feather is illustrating the extent to which the edits that you make are going to apply to the mask. So anything within this inner circle, it will apply those edits at 100% of the strength that you apply. And then it will graduate it from 100% at the edge of this inner circle to 0% at the edge of the second circle. So that's the graduation. In most cases, I apply the full feather, especially for the effect that we're going for here. I'm going to extend the size of the mask so that the light that I'm going to create from the right-hand side is reaching the swallow sat on its perch. Excellent, so that's my mask. I jump into effects. I'm going to reduce the dehaze quite considerably, and I'm going to warm that up. That's really accentuating the sense of the sun coming in from the right hand side. So show you to turn that mask off. That's the before, and that's with that dehaze effect coming in from the right hand side. One more mask that I'm going to show you on this image, and that's the brush mask, used quite extensively. Once you've selected the brush mask, you can adjust the size of your brush, either using your right hand and your left hand square brackets keys on your keyboard, or over here on this side, you can adjust the size using this slider. Once you've got the size of the brush you want, you should check whether your auto mask is on or off. If you leave your auto mask off, then wherever you select, it will highlight as part of your mask. And you can see here I'm trying to select the head of the bird, but the mask has crept outside of the bird. And that could be a problem. In some scenarios, that's exactly what you want, but in some scenarios, you really want to contain that mask within the area that you've identified. So let's just undo that and add the mask again. And in this case, we're going to auto mask. And you'll see now that when I'm selecting that bird's head, it's being much more discreet with the area that it's selecting. And then from there, I can adjust whatever it is that I'm looking to adjust. So I'm just going to raise the shadows a little. I'm going to raise the highlights a little. And let's add some bit of saturation for the bird's head, just to make that pop a little bit. And there we have it. 4 masks. We have the brush tool, we have the radial gradient, we have the linear gradient, and then we have the object mask. To see the impact of the masks on that image, just click on your mask tool again, and this little eye in the top left, that's the image before masking, and that's the image without masking. Before and after. Now, of course, there's more edits to be done on this bird. Certainly want to adjust the contrast of the bird itself to make that pop a little bit more. We might want to add a little bit of sharpening, but you can see the impact of using the masking tools rather than just the global edits. Let's move on to a second image. This image was taken in Clarence, or just outside of Clarence in South Africa. And we're going to use all of the masks that I just showed you on the previous image of the swallow. And then I'm going to apply a separate mask, which is the sky selection mask, and show you a really, really useful hack or tip or trick, whichever you prefer, to really nail your sky selections, which are critically important. So let's start. Again, done a basic edit here, nothing amazing, certainly not the final image. We'll jump straight into masks, and I want to really highlight this area on the left-hand side. And so I'm going to use the object select mask for that. And you'll see that's a pretty easy selection to make. Just increase the size of my brush and then just select this fairly roughly. Doesn't have to be overly accurate. And once you've broadly colored that in, that will select that area for you pretty accurately. That's pretty good. And what I want to do with that is I want to boost the contrast a little. I want to increase the texture. Please don't judge me on my editing in this video. I'm really just trying to articulate the usefulness of the masking tools. Just increase the clarity slightly. And I'm just going to increase the contrast a little bit more and bring out the whites a little bit more. And again, with using the little eye by the mask, you can see the before and after of those changes. So it just makes that a little bit more prominent in the image. Excellent. I'm now going to apply a linear gradient coming up from the bottom. And what I want to do is accentuate these grasses. So I'm going to increase the whites, I'm going to increase the contrast, and I'm going to bring down the shadows quite significantly. Just adjust the highlights, touch, maybe those whites a little bit more. And clicking on that eye icon, again, you can see the impact that that's had. Now, once you've selected a mask and created your edits for that mask, you can then reduce the masks if you want. And this is where we're going to use the brush again. And in this case, I'm going to use the brush to remove the impact of those edits on this part of the image in the bottom left. So I'm going to click on Subtract, select my brush, adjust my brush size, remember to ensure that my auto mask is selected, and then I'm just going to erase those edits from that part of the image, from that part of the mask. And when I show the overlay here, you can see there's still some there. So let's go back in and remove those areas. Good. Now we're going to add a radial gradient. This area here, I really want to accentuate the light that's coming through and warm that area up and brighten that area up. So let's select the radial mask, and it's going to be about that sort of size. I might need to subtract some elements from it, but for speed, let's use that selection. Just increase the exposure a little on there, and then adjust the temperature, just warm that area up a little. In fact, I think I can get away with brightening that a bit more, but I'm going to use the whites. And that's really accentuating the impact of the sun coming through there. If I turn the overlay on, you can see that I've overreached a little. So again, I'm going to subtract using the brush. And that's a pretty quick correction. Turn that mask on and off. So that's before, that's with that sunburst. Now, if you want to, you can add that effect to other parts of the image. And in this case, let's use the brush again on the add. Just reduce the brush size a little. And in this case, I'm going to reduce the flow. I don't want the impact to be quite as strong as it is here. So I'm going to reduce the flow of the brush to say 50%. And I'm just going to add to these areas here. And now I can select individual parts of the mask to see the effect. So in this case, just to see what I've done there with that brush, it was the second brush. Turn the eye off, you can see the impact it's had on the face of that rocky outcrop. Excellent. Okay, so now the new additional mask that we're going to look at in this image, which is the sky, select sky mask. And this is a real critical component of landscape editing. Of course, the foreground is critical, but that sky has to be right. So let's select this sky. And at first glance, it appears to have done a reasonable selection. But if you zoom in a bit, you can see that additional areas have been selected. Let's turn the mask on and off. You can see here that parts of this hill have been selected, even coming down as far as this area here and even into here. Now, the reason for that, I'm assuming, is because the algorithm that Adobe is using to identify which parts of the image are sky and which parts aren't is to some degree or other based on the luminosity. That's my assumption. But you can see that across the image here, there are a number of areas where parts of the image have been selected that absolutely are not sky. And here, this entire hill at the back has been selected as sky. So if I made an adjustment, then that's darkening all of those areas as well as the actual sky which I'm looking to affect. So you could subtract from that and use a brush and start selecting these areas that you want to remove, but that's pretty slow and pretty laborious. So my trick is to subtract the sky. Now you might say you've only just selected the sky. If you subtract it, then surely you'll neutralize and there will be no selection at all. Well, actually, that's not what happens. When you subtract the sky, it leaves all of the areas that you didn't want to select in the first place. So when I invert that second adjustment, that second selection of the sky, it makes a much cleaner selection overall. And now I can make the edits that I'm looking to make. So let's bring the exposure down a little, not too much. Boost the contrast. It's very blue. Let's just adjust the color by moving the temperature slightly warmer, not too much. And there you can see the impact of that selection. Now I'll show you one more trick on the sky selection, which is utilizing the intersect capability. So we have a mask, but I've got a very hard edge across the scene. And when I look at my edit, that hard edge feels to me a little unnatural. So I'm going to take this mask and I'm going to ask Adobe to only apply the edits I've made to where this mask intersects with another mask I'm going to apply. So I click on the three dots, and the other mask I want it to intersect with is going to be a linear gradient. And my linear gradient is going to go diagonally, parallel as possible as I can make to this ridgeline across the image. And I get the feather about right. And you can see when I click on the overlay, got 100% of the mask here, but then it's feathering it as it approaches this ridgeline. And the impact of that on the edit, that's without the intersection, that's with the intersection. Without the intersection, with the intersection. And I think that makes a significant difference to the overall image. So on this image, we've used the same masking tools as we did on the swallow, the object select, the radial gradient select, and the linear gradient select. And then in addition to that, we've used the sky selection tool for a sky mask. We've then used subtract sky, which is counterintuitive. But as you saw, once you invert that second selection, it makes the overall sky selection much more accurate, much more precise. And then we've applied a further technique, which is to intersect that mask with a linear gradient. And I think the combination of that really gives us a much cleaner edit. Let's look at the overall image with and without those masks. So that's before the edits that we've applied using the mask tools, and that's after. Before and after. Again, there's more work to be done on this image. I think this area is overdone, but hopefully you will have picked up some tips and tricks on how to use the masking tools that are available within Lightroom. Before we leave this image, let me show you one more piece of functionality within the masking. And it's a newly introduced feature within Lightroom. When you go to create a mask, you can select landscape. And when you select that, Adobe will try and identify the different elements of your landscape image. And you can see in this case, it's identified what it thinks is the sky, what it thinks are mountains, what it thinks is vegetation, and what it thinks is natural ground. And you can select one or more of those as individual masks. Personally, I don't find the feature very useful, but it is a quick way of selecting masks for different elements within your image. So I thought I'd quickly show you that. In this image of a male lion taken in the Kruger National Park, again, we're going to use some of the masks that we used in the previous two photographs, and then we'll apply a couple of others that we've not seen before. And again, a few tips and tricks on how to get the most of the masking capability. Once more, applied a basic edit to the image, nothing over the top here. And we're going to start with a new mask that you haven't seen before, which is the Select Subject mask. And in this case, you can see that that's done a pretty reasonable job. There's a portion here where the selection isn't quite right. So let's just dive into that and we'll subtract those areas that aren't quite right with a small brush. Tiny bit here. And then there's a bit up beneath his tail. And that's pretty good. So with that selection made, we'll make a few adjustments. So we're just going to slightly increase the exposure. Too much. The exposure slider can be so heavy-handed. Let's just move the whites a little and move the blacks down a little. Don't want to overdo it, but I just want to boost that contrast. I'm not a big fan of the contrast slider. Just take the shadows down a touch. Highlights can take some increase, and I think we can take some more whites. Cool, this is not an editing workshop, so let me move on before I get too pedantic. Okay, so with the mask, without that edit on that mask, you can see there's quite a bit of difference. So next trick coming up, or tip coming up, once you've got that mask, you're pretty happy with that mask, you can invert it. So if you click on the three dots, you can duplicate that mask and invert it at the same time. That will create another mask for you. You can see it's not identical, but it's pretty close. So we have a problem with the paw here, which has been selected as part of the mask. And it looks like we've got a little bit of a problem on the lion's chin here. So we'll subtract, we'll use a brush, and we'll quickly increase the size there and just make sure that we're not selecting that part. A little bit around its nose and it's there, that's fine. And we'll move down here and make sure its paw is not selected as part of the background. I'm moving pretty quickly here. You can be as precise as you need to be, and you'll have a real sense of how precise you need to be because you'll have an idea of which edits you're going to apply to the masked area. And depending on how subtle or how bold you're going to be, that will tell you exactly how accurate you need to be in your selection. For the purposes of this, I think that's fine. There's some work that could be done on the tail. But what I'm going to do is reduce the exposure a little bit on the background. I'm trying to get this line to pop. I'm going to reduce the shadows. I want that to be pretty dark along with the black. So I'm actually going to reduce the texture in the background and the clarity, just to get that to fade out a little bit. I'm just trying to get this line to pop here, as you can see. And then I only want that to apply to the background. So I'm going to intersect that mask with a linear gradient. So therefore, those edits only apply to the parts of the image where the linear gradient intersects with the inverted selection I made previously. So let me show you the overlay. And you can see those red areas are the only parts of the image where those edits affect. Happy with that. The final new mask I'm going to show you is the range selection. And there are multiple range selections. If we go up to create new mask, there is the ability to select on depth. I've never used that mask. The luminance, so the lightness and darkness of certain parts of the image. And the example we're going to use today is the color range. So in this image, I quite like the vibrance and the saturation of the lion. I'm not so keen on it in the rest of the image. Now, you saw that I selected the rest of the image, so I could have adjusted the saturation there. I could also use the color panel to adjust the saturation and the values on the greens and the yellows within this image. As ever, with Adobe Lightroom, there are 4 or 5 or 6 different ways to achieve the same outcome. I'm using the color range mask just as a way of illustrating the capability to you. So you select the color range and then you select the colors that you're looking for. I'm looking for greens and yellows, so I'm going to select quite a big area here. And you can see that really has selected a lot of the image. I'm not so concerned about the front of the image. I certainly don't want to affect anything on the lion. So what we're going to do is we're going to intersect that mask again, once more with a linear gradient. And then I'm going to, from that mask, I'm going to subtract the subject. So that will remove the line in its entirety. So now, when I look at the overlay, I've got 100% of the effect at the top. It's gradually decreasing because of the intersect with the linear gradient, and I'm excluding everything in the subject mask. So I've got a really nice selection there. And now, when I go into color and adjust the saturation, you can see I can move that quite a lot. If I moved it all the way down, you can see the graduation in effect. But I'm just going to remove that to -13, -14. I like that. Finally, just for fun, we're going to add another radial gradient. This time, I want the gradient to start outside of the image. So make the image much smaller, and the radial gradient, the center of that gradient, is outside of the image. It's a very useful trick. And again, what we're trying to do here is suggest some sunlight coming in from the left-hand side. So I'm going to dehaze the image a little. I'm going to warm the image up a little within that mask area, not too much. And I'm going to take the subject out from that selection so that the subject isn't affected. Let's go back to a full-size image, and you can see the impact of that mask on, off, on, off. Now what I'd like to do is just add some small parts of the image to that mask so that they get the same effect, and those parts of the image are on the lion's face, but I don't want it to be the full extent of those edits. So I'm going to reduce the flow to 35, and then I'm just going to apply that to the front of the lion there, just up into its mane. And I'm quite happy with that. So let me show you the impact of that last change only within the mask itself. So the overall mask, before, after, before, after. That final change we made, before, after, before, after. So relatively subtle, but I think that really adds a nice final part to the image. One more thing. Again, with a radial gradient. Radial gradient is a fantastic way to add a vignette. Please don't use the vignette tool within Adobe. It's a blunt instrument, and using a radial gradient will give you much more control. So we'll have the radial gradient over the lion itself. In this case, we'll reduce the feather so that most of the lion is covered, and certainly the lion's head is covered. And then we're going to invert that mask. So it's the area outside that's going to be affected by the edits. Reduce the exposure a little. Reduce the shadows a little. Bring the blacks down. I'm going to reduce the saturation a little. And I'm happy with that. There you have it. The masking tools within Adobe Lightroom. They're super powerful. Please don't judge the tools based on the images that I showed you. There was a lot more work to be done on those images, but hopefully you at least got a sense of the capability of the masks within Lightroom and how you can combine masks or subtract from masks or intersect masks to really give you a really fine degree of control over where your edits apply. If you have any additional hints and tips that others might find useful, then please drop me a note in the comment section below. I read every single one of them. I'll do my best to respond to them. In the meantime, please take care. I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.